It was a cool spring morning on April 14, 2023. In the quiet rural town of Millfield, Ohio, a place where neighbors still wave to each other, and doors are left unlocked at night. Margaret Holloway, a 68-year-old retired teacher known and loved by generations of local families, was last seen outside her modest brick home, tending to her tulips. She had lived alone since her husband passed away in 2016, and by all accounts, she kept a simple, peaceful routine. That morning, she waved to the mailman at 9:12 a.m. His dashboard camera later confirmed this. No one could have predicted that this would be the last verified sighting of her alive. When her neighbor, Doris, stopped by later that evening to bring her homemade peach cobbler, the house was unusually silent. Margaret's car was gone from the driveway, but her porch light was still on, flickering slightly in the dusk. Assuming she had stepped out, Doris left the dessert by the door. But the next day, when the cobbler remained untouched and Margaret didn't show up for her weekly church volunteer shift, people began to worry. A welfare check was called in by her daughter Emily, who lived in Cincinnati and hadn't been able to reach her for 2 days. When police entered Margaret's home, the scene inside was deeply unsettling, not because it was chaotic, but because everything appeared almost too normal. Her glasses sat neatly on the kitchen counter next to a half-filled mug of tea. Her purse was still on the table, wallet inside, but her house keys were missing. The television was paused on a local gardening show, and dinner in oven roasted chicken with potatoes was still in the oven, untouched and now cold. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no blood, no overturned furniture. It was as if she had stepped outside mid-task and simply evaporated into thin air. But the strangest discovery was found on the refrigerator door. A sticky note, written in large, unfamiliar handwriting, simply read, "Don't look for me. It's safer that way." Family members were adamant. The handwriting was not hers. Margaret was left-handed and used cursive for nearly everything. This note was scrawled in block letters with a right-handed slant, and it gave the detectives their first chilling hint that someone else might have been involved. Or worse, that Margaret had been coerced into leaving. The next few hours led to a flurry of activity. Neighbors were questioned. Local surveillance footage was pulled, and Margaret's phone records were analyzed. But all data showed a clean break. Her cell phone had been turned off at 9:27 a.m., just minutes after she waved at the mailman. Her car, a beige 2007 Toyota Camry, was also missing. But no license plate hits or traffic cams had picked it up leaving town. It was as if Margaret Holloway had driven herself straight into a void, leaving behind only questions, a cold dinner, and a cryptic note taped to the fridge. When investigators returned to Margaret Holloway's home the next morning to conduct a deeper forensic sweep, they were struck again by the eerie stillness of the house. Nothing had changed. No family member had touched anything. It was as if time had frozen in place. Every room was immaculately clean, almost unnaturally so. Detectives noted that there wasn't a single speck of dust on the bookshelves or a misplaced item on her neatly made bed. Her calendar on the kitchen wall still showed appointments, doctor's visits, book club meetings, and a lunch date with a former student, none of which she showed up for. But despite the pristine condition of the home, one object stood out in stark contrast. The sticky note on the fridge door was removed and sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation for handwriting analysis. Investigators took dozens of samples of Margaret's known writing, old grocery lists, birthday cards, and school papers from her teaching days. All showed the same consistent style: slanted cursive, careful penmanship, soft loops. The note on the fridge, in contrast, was written in shaky, rigid block letters, with pressure marks that suggested force or distress. Curiously, the paper itself was new. No fingerprints except for Margaret's faintly on the corner, likely from reading it. No other prints. No DNA. Detectives also discovered something unnerving inside Margaret's study. Tucked into a manila folder, labeled personal, were clippings of missing persons cases, some local, some from entirely different states. Dates were scribbled in the margins, circled in red or underlined. One note read, "Pattern." Another said, "All seniors, all in spring." The folder had never been shared with her family. And no one could explain why a retired teacher would quietly collect cases of elderly people who had disappeared some decades earlier. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like obsession, or preparation. Even more unsettling was what they found in the guest room closet. Behind a stack of old linens, a box contained an unmarked cell phone, not the one Margaret used regularly. It was a flip phone, prepaid, with very few contacts and almost no call history. But one number had been dialed 3 days before her disappearance. When authorities traced it, the line was inactive. No name, no address, and the SIM card had been wiped. Why would Margaret have a burner phone, hidden from everyone, if she wasn't involved in something she didn't want others to know? As forensic teams combed the home inch by inch, they began to feel what her family already feared. This wasn't just a case of an elderly woman getting lost or suffering from confusion. Margaret Holloway had either been deliberately taken or had deliberately left, and, either way, someone had gone to great lengths to leave behind a house that looked spotless, yet whispered of something deeply wrong beneath the surface. In the weeks following Margaret Holloway's disappearance, the local police department was flooded with tips, some hopeful, some bizarre, some deeply unsettling. The first came just 4 days after her vanishing. A waitress in Gallipolis, Ohio, claimed to have served an older woman who matched Margaret's description. She said the woman was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dark sunglasses, speaking very little, and constantly looking over her shoulder. The woman paid in cash and left without finishing her meal. When shown a photo of Margaret, the waitress hesitated, then nodded slowly. But the restaurant's security cameras weren't working. That day, there was no footage to verify it. A week later, a gas station attendant, 80 miles east, reported seeing a woman sitting alone in a parked car for nearly an hour. He said she appeared to be arguing with someone on the phone or maybe rehearsing something, as her lips moved, but he heard no sound. The car matched the description of Margaret's 2007 Toyota Camry, but once again, the grainy security footage captured only the back of the car, and the license plate wasn't visible. By the time police arrived, the vehicle and the woman were gone. It felt like they were chasing a ghost. Over the next 2 months, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Sightings of a woman fitting Margaret's profile came in from small towns, truck stops, and diners across Ohio and even into West Virginia. Each time, she was seen alone. Each time, she vanished before anyone could get close. A farmer near Zane's swore she walked through his property barefoot one night, clutching a flashlight and mumbling something about getting out before dark. Another witness, a priest in a roadside chapel, claimed she showed up during Mass and slipped out before communion. No one saw her come in. No one saw her leave. But perhaps the most troubling report came from a motel manager near Marietta. He told detectives that a woman checked in under the name Marla H., paid in cash, and stayed for just one night. The room, when inspected afterward, had the bed neatly made, but the mirror had been smeared with what appeared to be ash or soot, forming shapes that couldn't quite be explained. No fingerprints, no hair, no trace DNA. Just the faint scent of something burnt. And a Bible left open on the dresser to the book of Psalms chapter 55. Verse 6. Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away, and be at rest. Despite nearly a dozen scattered sightings, none could be verified. Each left behind vague impressions, second-hand accounts, and frustrating dead ends. It was as if Margaret was hiding in plain sight, or worse, being moved, watched, and controlled by someone who knew exactly how to stay just one step ahead. Detectives grew uneasy. Was she running? Was she being followed? Or had the real Margaret Holloway disappeared long ago, and these glimpses were just shadows, flickers of something deeper and far more disturbing? Nearly 4 months had passed since Margaret Holloway disappeared, and by then, the trail had grown cold. Her family clung to hope, but leads were fading. Then, out of nowhere, something horrifying and electrifying shattered the silence. On the morning of August 3rd, Emily Holloway, Margaret's only daughter, received a voicemail from an unknown number. The call had come in at 2:13 a.m. while Emily slept. The message, just under 11 seconds long, changed everything. A voice, faint, distorted, and trembling, said, "I'm okay. Please stop digging. It's not what you think." No greeting, no name. And then a soft, breathy static before the line went dead. Emily played the message nearly a dozen times. The voice was warped, but she swore it was her mother's. The tone, the pauses, the way she said please, it was unmistakable, yet something was off. It didn't sound like Margaret speaking freely. It sounded rehearsed, forced, like someone was standing just out of frame, watching. Emily brought the voicemail to the detectives, who immediately launched a digital forensics review. But the number was unregistered, a burner phone, routed through 2 spoofed networks and likely discarded. No trace. No callback. Whoever sent the message had gone to great lengths to stay hidden. More unsettling than the message itself was the timing. Just 48 hours earlier, Emily had appeared on a local news broadcast pleading for more help in the search. During her emotional appeal, she directly addressed her mother, saying, "If you're out there and you're scared, we're not giving up." Detectives began to suspect that someone had been watching the broadcast and responded, but why now? And why ask her to stop digging? What exactly did Margaret mean by "it's not what you think"? Was it a cryptic warning, a cry for help, or a manipulated message designed to silence the family? Further analysis of the audio revealed something chilling in the background, a faint ticking sound. Like a clock or metronome, repeating every second, the sound was subtle, almost buried beneath the voice. Technicians enhanced the clip, hoping it would point to a specific location or recording device, but no match was found. Even more curious, when audio engineers slowed the recording down, they claimed there was another voice, barely audible, whispering behind Margaret's words. They couldn't make out what it said, but it was their low, guttural, and unnatural. Emily began receiving anonymous letters after that. No return address, just plain white envelopes with photocopied messages, some biblical verses. Others just typed phrases like "do not grieve the living," and she chose to forget. Detectives couldn't trace them either. It was as if someone was playing a game, dangling breadcrumbs, manipulating emotions, and controlling the pace of the investigation. Emily began to wonder, was her mother truly alive and in hiding? Or was someone using her voice to keep the family from getting too close to something they weren't supposed to find? It was a cold December afternoon when a local Travis Myers, ventured into a remote stretch of Wayne National Forest, not far from the Ohio-West Virginia border. Travis was familiar with the terrain. He'd been hunting in those woods since he was a teenager, but on this day, he took a trail he rarely explored. The path was overgrown, buried under layers of fallen leaves, and choked with branches from winter winds. Nearly 3 miles in, where the forest thickened and cell service vanished, something caught his eye, a faint glint of light beneath the brush. At first, he thought it was a piece of discarded metal or a hunting blind, but as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. There, buried under pine needles and half concealed by creeping ivy, was a dust-covered beige Toyota Camry. The license plate, dulled by time and dirt, was still visible. Travis snapped a photo and hiked back out to call it in. Within hours, the area was cordoned off by local police and forensic teams. It was Margaret Holloway's car, no doubt about it. The same car that had vanished 8 months ago without a single traffic camera catching its exit. How it had ended up in one of the least traveled sections of the forest, without leaving tire tracks on any known trail, was a complete mystery. Even more puzzling, the vehicle was locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry or tampering. Inside the car, investigators found Margaret's reading glasses, folded neatly on the passenger seat. A faded photograph of her, with her 5th grade class, sat on the dashboard, weighed down by a small stone. The car's battery was dead, but the keys were still in the ignition, turned halfway. In the glove compartment was an old Ohio road atlas, with several remote areas circled in red ink, some hundreds of miles away, others close to the forest itself. There were no food wrappers, no water bottles, no camping gear, nothing to suggest someone had lived in, or even returned to the car. And yet, there was no mold, no mildew, and no sign of rodents or insects. It was as if time inside the vehicle had somehow, paused. The most unsettling detail, however, was discovered in the trunk. Tucked inside the spare tire well was a thin, unmarked envelope, sealed with clear tape. Inside were 3 items: a burner phone, battery removed, $4,000 in small crisp bills, a black leather notebook filled with initials, dates, and strange symbols, some crossed out with violent red slashes. At the center of several pages, one name appeared over and over again: J. Carter. Detectives quickly discovered this was the name of a former student from Margaret's early teaching years. But he, too, had gone missing back in 2009, under strange circumstances. And his case had never been solved. The forest discovery reignited the investigation, but it also raised more questions than it answered. Why was Margaret's car hidden so deliberately, yet untouched? Why was her past student connected to a notebook filled with coded entries and cash? And if she had been in the car, where was she now? Search dogs were brought in. Drones swept the skies. But there were no footprints. No scent trail. Nothing at all. It was as though she had driven into the forest and vanished again, just as suddenly as the first time. The initial search of Margaret Holloway's vehicle had already turned up strange and disturbing items. But it wasn't until the forensic team conducted a second, more invasive sweep, that they found something even more alarming. Beneath the passenger seat, where the carpet met the frame, a technician noticed a slight indentation, a seam that didn't match the car's original design. Upon prying it open, they uncovered a hidden compartment, no larger than a shoebox. Inside were items that deepened the mystery and shifted the investigation in a direction no one was prepared for. The compartment held a second, older notebook, this one wrapped in plastic and far more damaged by time and moisture than the one found in the trunk. The pages inside were filled with a mixture of handwritten notes, erratic sketches, and what appeared to be personal messages written in Margaret's familiar cursive, but the tone was increasingly paranoid. One page read, "They always come. Back in April. I thought it was done. It's never done." Another page had a crude drawing of a tree with numbers scratched into the trunk. 44.17 to 1, 82.0139. Investigators later identified the coordinates. They pointed to a dense stretch of forest 2 counties over. A place with no trails and no public access. Next to the notebook was a small, battered cassette recorder, the kind used in classrooms during the 1980s. It contained a single tape, unlabeled. When played, the recording began with several seconds of static. Then the soft sound of Margaret's voice, but not calm or collected like in her old classroom tapes. Her tone was distressed, trembling, almost whispering. "They're watching. I think he knows I remember now. It wasn't just one of them. It never was." Then came a long silence, and a sudden loud thud, followed by what sounded like hurried breathing, and then the tape cut off completely. Investigators also found a photograph in the compartment, a black and white image. Clearly old, with torn edges and faded ink. It showed a young boy, standing in what appeared to be the very same forest where the car was discovered. On the back of the photo, written in pen, were the words, "He was the first." No one believed me. There was no name, no date, no other context, but officers were able to enhance the background. And a faint silhouette of another figure, taller, almost cloaked in shadow, was visible several yards behind the child, partially obscured by trees. Perhaps most confusing of all, there was a folded index card taped to the inside of the compartment lid. On it were 3 lines. "Trust no one, do not go back to the house." Carter wasn't the only one. Detectives were now torn between theories. Was Margaret trying to expose something, or running from something she had once been part of? Was this the unraveling of a woman descending into madness, or the breadcrumbs of a secret she had kept buried for decades? As investigators began piecing together the items found in Margaret Holloway's hidden compartment, a darker, more tangled narrative started to emerge. One that hinted Margaret may not have been just a victim, but a keeper of secrets. Old employment records revealed that, shortly before her retirement, Margaret had taken multiple unpaid leaves of absence, citing family emergencies. But family members had no recollection of any such emergencies. Further inquiry uncovered that during those periods, Margaret had checked into motels under false names and had withdrawn large amounts of cash from different branches of her bank, never enough to raise red flags, but always in patterns, quiet, intentional, like someone preparing for something. Digging deeper, detectives discovered Margaret's name had once surfaced in a night one's investigation, long before she retired, when a student in her class had gone missing during a field trip. At the time, the child's disappearance was ruled unrelated to Margaret. She had a solid alibi, and the case eventually went cold. But that missing student, Jason Carter, the very same name scribbled repeatedly in her notebook. Suddenly, everything changed. Was Margaret hiding guilt, trying to expose a cover-up, or was she being silenced because she knew something that no one else was supposed to uncover? Even more disturbing were interviews with a handful of former students who had long since moved away. 2 separate individuals, now adults, recalled that Margaret had warned them about strange people lingering near the school grounds. People who weren't staff or parents. One woman recalled a vivid memory, Margaret pulling her aside after class and whispering, "If anyone ever tells you to go into the woods, don't. Not even if they say I sent them." At the time, the child assumed it was a game. Now, she wasn't so sure. These weren't the kinds of warnings that made sense, unless Margaret had witnessed something herself. Investigators also found a safety deposit box registered under a variation of her name, Memji Holloway. Inside were even more personal items, letters addressed to JC, some never mailed, filled with guilt and cryptic references to what happened in the clearing. and a child's drawing of a cabin in the woods, surrounded by tall black figures. The drawing was signed with a name they didn't recognize, Benji. No one in Margaret's family knew who Benji was. There were no records of any children or grandchildren by that name. But what unsettled detectives most was the tone of the letters, protective, almost maternal. It raised the question, had Margaret taken in a child secretly, or lost one? On the final page of her second notebook, tucked behind the back cover, investigators found a single handwritten sentence, one that still haunts those who worked the case. Some people don't disappear. They just stop being found. Margaret Holloway's past was beginning to look like a puzzle with missing pieces, a double life woven through whispers, abandoned coordinates, and a trail of lost children. But where did it all lead? And if she had finally decided to reveal the truth, who stopped her? To this day, Margaret Holloway has never been found. Her car sits in an evidence lot, untouched since the day it was pulled from the forest. The notebooks, the recordings, the strange symbols, none of it has led to her. Only deeper into the shadows of what she might have known. Or what she was running from. Was she a victim of something unspeakable? Or a whistleblower caught in a web, too dark to escape? No body, no final message, no closure, just a trail of unanswered questions, and chilling whispers left behind in the woods. And maybe, just maybe, some people disappear, not because they're lost, but because they're hiding from something the rest of us were never meant to find.